So this is just, I think, one last slide on career advice for you folks uh, from the perspective of AI and work culture and kind of companies that you can look at. So I would definitely say the most important thing that I have learned over the last 15 years, it's important to develop a learning habit. It doesn't mean that, let's say, if you get a job in Google or Facebook, that you can stop learning because technology is changing very quickly. If you want to have a career in tech, you need to stay on top of what is happening, read different blogs, listen to podcasts, be active on Twitter. There's so much information that is out there on the internet that is readily accessible now, thanks to the power of internet and different startups. And keep talking to people. Right? Don't be in a silo, don't be in a bubble. And let's say if you're just working on finance, don't not talk to people outside finance. It's important to have a broad view of the world, especially starting from a young age. Then going to point two, as I mentioned earlier, it's important to build domain expertise. So as you're starting out, let's say you go into a degree in engineering or medicine, it's important to go deep into that field. And I think your 20s are a very interesting time and very appropriate time to go deep. It's a time where you have the opportunity to take a lot of risks. If let's say you start with finance, you don't like it, you can move to healthcare, tech, or e-commerce, whatever. So be open to developing a lot of expertise, and it takes time. It's not something that can be developed overnight, and there are no shortcuts or hacks to building domain expertise. You really have to spend the time. And there's like a proxy, like 10,000 hours helps you become an expert in a field. So think about how many years it will take you to work 10,000 hours in a particular field, right? And going to point three, so AI is more than writing code and building models. There's a lot that goes into building and deploying AI in the real world. So as I mentioned, it is important to know how to work with people from different backgrounds. Let's say if you go on to work outside India, you have to work with people from different cultures. They have a different mindset. It's important to understand how they learn to think because in life in general, like sales and persuasion skills will be always very useful to convince other stakeholders that what your work is important or your work has impact, right? So always think about the technology is important to understand, but you have to work with people to deploy that technology, right? Point four is that, yeah, so I see a lot of young people now spending a lot of time in startups, moving quickly from one startup to the other. Let's say sometimes spending years, sometimes spending 2, 3 years. But while you're doing this, it's important to understand that always optimize for your own learning and growth. And you have to be very selfish in this respect because sometimes your incentives, your career goals may not be aligned with what the company or the organization is interested in, and you have to learn to take risks and analyze a particular situation that you are in to see whether this is a good fit for me in the short term, in the long term, whether it is matching my interests at the moment, or if you have new interests, you can think about moving to another company or organization. Right? So always think about learning and growing, and find situations or companies or enterprises that help you in that aspect, right? So yeah, so point five is that in the I see a lot of I've seen over the last 20 years, people would first in the early 20s go into software, then there was a trend of going into investment banking, and now I see a lot of people just go into startups right after school or even undergrad, right? If you follow trends, then you're already late to the field. But let's say if you have a genuine interest in a particular field, it might become hot or trendy, let's say 5, 10 years down the line. And then all the expertise and intuition you built in that field will help you be a leading expert in that field. So in the early years, it's important to learn and grow, learn as much as you can. Money will follow. Because if you optimize for money from the very early on, you might earn like millions, let's say, and wish that for all of you. But sometimes you will find that after a certain point, when you hit a certain threshold in terms of finances or net worth, it doesn't give you as much satisfaction as learning to grow, or being useful. Everyone wants to be useful in the world, and you have to leave behind certain legacy. So you can use that money in positive ways. But if you optimize for money in the short term, then you might take a hit in terms of your own growth. Right? So it's important to not burn out and think of career as a long marathon. Right? So if you're in your early 20s now, you have to work, let's say, at least late 50s or early 60s. You have to sustain your interest and gradually build momentum. Right? So it's like being like a tortoise and not like a right. Now specifically, point six with respect to AI is that, or in general also, always select organizations where you have a very strong leader or manager who is very inspiring. Because no matter, even if you're in, let's say, the top companies, Google, Tesla, Facebook, uh, it's not the name or the brand that defines your day-to-day experience, it's the manager and the team. Because you spend most of your time interacting with those 5 to 10 to 20 people, and they have a much more stronger impact on your career growth and trajectory than the name, or the brand on your CV. So always screen for good leaders, inspiring leaders who will help you grow, and who are an inspiration for you also, potential role models. Right? So that is very important. And with respect to AI, when you're looking for a role as a data scientist or ML engineer, look for companies which are mature in their AI trajectory. If you're in a startup, let's say, which is very early stage, maybe there is not that infrastructure or that data, then there's not much you can do. But let's say if it's a slightly more mature startup, already has a few use cases, you can start building and deploying some real world applications and already demonstrating. Because when you move from one company or role to another, it is important to show to your next company what have you done in the previous job, what impact did you create, be it AI or any other discipline, right? And the other thing that is very important, and I feel that the young generation is very aware also from very beginning, is that the culture in the team of the company is very important. Sometimes there are companies, and there are some bad apples everywhere, which can affect your job experience, your work-life balance. So it's important to screen for positive culture where they encourage risk taking. There's a sense of respect, right, for and appreciation for the value and the skills and the experience that you bring, uh, and try to screen for culture, even if the potential job or company is offering you a high salary. Because I've seen a lot of people cases where people go for some of these very high growth companies, but do not have a great experience. So that has a deep impact on a lot of people. It's important to work in a culture where where everyone is happy and everyone is growing and everyone is learning. And lastly, I would say that think of your career or plan for your career both in the short term. So let's say this is my 1 year, 2 year goal, and let's say I can achieve that in my present company or the next one, and also slightly longer term, because let's say what is trendy today may not be trendy 4 5 years down the line. So, and which comes back to the point that if you're always learning, you'll always be on top of what is happening, and you'll adapt to the different careers out there. So, let's say AI and product management is very hot nowadays, but a lot of these roles might be automated to a lot of to a big extent with software. And what will you do 5 years, 10 years down the line? So, as I said, going back to point one, it's important to keep learning again and again. Be open to change, because I think with the advent of technology and how quickly technology is changing, jobs and careers will be very different 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line.